thank you all for coming here and attending our Ripples of Hope Business Summit here at home in Manchester. It is brilliant to see you all here. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce myself. My name's Nicola Watson, and I'm the incoming Executive Director of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights UK. There's some big shoes to fill with Dennis's role, but I am really privileged to be here today. I'd secondly like to take the opportunity to ask you all to turn around to your neighbours, introduce yourself, maybe tell somebody something about yourself, why you're here today, or who your favourite superhero is, anything, but something to be able to introduce yourselves to each other. Well, that went well. Thank you. Well, I think that was the best icebreaker that I've actually taken part in, so thank you very much. We at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights UK are thrilled to be able to host this summit here in the city of Manchester, a city of great pride, a city of culture and equity, especially after a period of time where we all have to pull together as the city unfolds, and we all do, from a period of strain and distance. Now, none of this would be possible at all without our fantastic partners. We've got Belong, the Cohesion and Integration Network. We have Equilibrium Foundation, Northwest Business Leadership Team. We have Porter Novelli, Roland Dransfield. We have GMCA, Manchester City Council, and Home itself. We're also extremely fortunate today to be joined by some exceptional people. They're here to share their thoughts, their experiences, their insights, and also to take questions from you and how we can all shift to a regenerative future together. We'll have the opportunity this afternoon to take part in some smaller workshops, to work together in smaller groups, to offer tools and experiences and skills, and to hopefully really keep the conversation going. In between these sessions, we are going to be able to have coffee breaks, we'll have a lunch break, and again, please take the time to network and to socialise and to get to know each other and to keep the stories and the conversations and questions from this morning going. I would also now like to take the opportunity to introduce our first keynote speaker. He's an individual who seeks to inspire the emergence of a leader in each of us. He's an author, he's a speaker on various leadership issues, and is really championing a new story of sustainability that lies at the heart of his work. It really is my absolute pleasure to welcome Matt Macartney to the stage. Thank you.
A few years ago, I attended a conference, a business conference. Like many such occasions, you know, it had moments of interest and quite a lot of disinterest. There were some wonderful things that happened, but they were actually not as great as the rather dull moments that also existed. And then onto this stage came this man, an elderly man who was nearly 90 years old at the time. He was like a blade of grass pushed by a puff of wind or something similar. He was so thin and elderly, and he glided into that place. And he reveled under the name of Cordy Tyndall Vivian, African-American minister, who had advised, he said, something like 5 US presidents around human rights, social justice, all these things, and said that he hoped that when he left this life, he would not be judged for the results he'd achieved, because he'd done his best, but he wasn't very impressed with how things had worked out. And he only spoke for a few minutes, but everybody in that audience was still as they listened to him. And he concluded with, there are only 2 questions anyway. What do you live for? And what do you live by? And I would love it if you were to take those 2 questions with you home and ask yourself, what do I live for? Not, as it were, occasionally, or when I'm at my best, but in the entirety and wholeness of you as a human being, what do you live for? And what do you live by? The principles, the handrail, whatever it is that you have constructed that will allow you to move in a fluid, fluent, powerful way to achieve the outcome of the first question. It's more than 60 years since I sat round the family dining table in my early teens. And I remember a conversation happening in our family about what we were doing to the world and what we were doing to undermine future generations of human and more than human. More than 60 years since we spoke about what we were doing to the earth, what we were doing to the water, what we were doing to air, what we were doing to all those communities who somehow have not found a place in our love and care. And decade after decade has rolled by, and now we're here. And now we're here at this extraordinary time in history. But I have to say that while I find it extremely painful, and while I almost hold my hands in front of my mouth with a sense of the horror of what is potentially unfolding, I can't imagine a better time to be alive. I feel so deeply privileged, really, to be alive at a time like this and with the choice to do everything in my power, small as that may be, to contribute to a world that our children and the unborn, human and more than human, could inhabit. Somehow, we've got lost in a story that said that our own personal little world was pretty much, even though we might give a nod to wider spheres of influence, but pretty much our own small personal circle was really what it was all about. Ourselves, our status, our careers, what we own, what we possess, maybe our families, our daughters, our sons, our children, possibly grandparents, but it's getting weaker. And not far after, it's pretty much, token, maybe, yes, the organization we work for, but we all know in our hearts that when we leave that organization within a short time, we will be forgotten. We have to bring somehow the personal, the societal, and the planetary threads and start weaving them together, as more ancient peoples have done for thousands upon thousands of years before we began to inhabit this new story that we have chosen to call civilization, a modern society. In these islands, we were once a people who built our homes with the doorways facing the rising sun. 2,000 years ago, we did that. What does that say to you about those people? the Coritani, the Ordovici, the Trinovantes, the Silures, the Dumnonii. We were a tribal people in those days, and we built our homes with our doorways facing the rising sun. Because whatever else we were as people, awe and reverence were in us in a way that has long since departed. The challenge that leaders have now, and just in case any of us somehow would prefer to absent ourselves from that place, let's understand, or at least consider, what it means to be a leader. And I would say a leader is anyone who is brave enough to act, to take action in alignment with their conscience, with their deeper knowing of what is real and true and required. Leadership never did have anything to do with the title we carry, the car we drive, the house we live in, the neighborhood, the corner window office. Leadership is a choice that you make when you care enough about something to do something about it. So the question is, do we care enough? And personally, I think the jury's out at the moment. Because what is asked of us at this time is something unprecedented, really. It seems to me, having coached and mentored many leaders from all different spheres, going from corporate down to activists and everything in between, children as well, it seems to me that beneath however we present ourselves to the world, inside most human beings is some level of insecurity, some level of hoping that nobody quite finds out who it is that exists behind this mask. Many of us have and possess, if we're prepared to be really honest with ourselves, a fairly low opinion of ourselves, and those that don't, then inauthenticity somehow winds its way inside us. This is a time when we are called to go way beyond, I believe, however we have previously seen ourselves and understood our potential to be, and put aside those feelings that ask the question, who me? Who me? Well, I'm not really that fluent, or I don't have the right mind, or I'm sort of, well, this is what I'm doing, and these are my things, and there are other people far better suited. No, we have to stand in front of the mirror and say, if not you, who? So if nothing else, I hope that in these couple of days, you leave with the resolve that everything you do will be devoted towards the potential of a regenerative future. And if not regenerative, then it strikes me that it's likely to be degenerative, because that is the trajectory that we're on right now. Fires burn all around the world right now. Entire populations are on the move, seeking somewhere to be safe, where they can care for their children, find water and food to drink. Entire communities of people feel displaced and truly believe that they have no worth. What is a young person who truly believes that they have no value? How are they likely to respond to that? Well, I think it might be a little bit like my stepson, who just went AWOL, really. Became part of a gang in North London and made his and many other people's lives probably a misery. Thank goodness that he called me one day, came down to my place in Devon. This young man who just burst with energy and power and a desire for a rite of passage that would take him to the very threshold of his capacity. So he's now a US Navy SEAL going on missions. Would I have chosen that for him? I think not, but I think I'd rather him there than where he was in North London. We have so many people that feel they have no place. So what is it that is asked of us? Well, there is a story I'd like to share with you. I took a small group of leaders, corporate leaders, to meet with a man called Mac Maharaj, who was the leader of the ANC forces on the ground during the apartheid regime when they were fighting for their freedom. Mac Maharaj had to make decisions which cost the lives of many people. So we went there to ask him a question. Of all your experience of making decisions where you knew that the lives of other human beings depended upon these decisions, what do you consider to be the most important trait that you would look for in let's say, a senior deputy of yours? What do you think is required of leaders at this time that would somehow give you the reassurance that they are the right kind of people for this time? And he said, yes, I have an answer for that. But first, I would like each of you to ask yourself the same question. And then hold it close to your heart while I answer mine. He said, the most important attribute, willingness, that I seek in a deputy of mine is and everybody in that room thought he was going to say self-confidence. He said self-doubt. I have had it up to here, he said, with leaders who have no questions. Leaders who have no self-doubt. Leaders who choose to inhabit a ridiculous story about their own omnipotence and capacity. Leaders who have laid questions aside, sort of thing, and assume that because it comes out of their mouth, it must be the right thing. I had a deputy of that kind, he said. And I came to understand that he was one of the most dangerous people in my team. For through his decisions and this unwillingness to question, to sit with being unsure, to be unwilling to change his mind, be unwilling to listen, cost the lives of many fine and brave people. And of course, self-doubt has to sit within a wider context of self-confidence and other attributes and beings. But at this time, surely, we do profoundly need to question some of the basic assumptions that we have carried unconsciously for the last millennia or so. There are three questions that I have to go alongside Cordy, Tyndale, Vivian that I would also love you to consider. I think they are three questions for a leader. What is it that you most deeply and profoundly love? What is it that you most deeply and profoundly, the emphasis is on deeply and profoundly love? When I ask this question of many people, and I do ask it of a lot of people and get the opportunity to work with them, you would be amazed at how many answer this question with the words, I never have. Deeply and profoundly loved. And I have a lot of stories, really, about those people. But I think there's an ocean of lostness somehow, aloneness and sadness with that. When we have discovered, and by the way, this is not like a workshop question. This is not something to deal with and then you've done it. This is a question to carry into our leadership going forwards through the decades that we live, because it does shift. At this rather late stage in my life, I have a 4-year-old son. If I was to ask him what he most deeply and profoundly loves, I hope he might name me and his mum, his older brother who's in his middle 20s. But of course, chocolate would also be on the list. And so with the new the new kitten, whose life he nearly extinguishes with the excess of his love, because he's 4. It shifts and changes over time. When we define what we deeply and profoundly love, we have, in a sense, if I can use this word, defined what is sacred for us. And I think a leader should know that, because it is towards that they are in service. If there are any parents in this audience, then I'm sure, I hope, I'm fairly sure, that you will love your children. But do you love mine? Do you love the kids in the Lebanon? Do you love the children living here in Manchester? Like one that I knew, who was extracted out of a home as a tiny little child, with his two parents dead in the apartment for 5 days from a drug overdose, was finally brought out of that house, couldn't speak for more than a year. You love that? Is that included? What is it you most deeply and profoundly love? Why do we not ask that question throughout nursery, primary school, secondary school, higher education, all the way through? Why do we not ask that in our boards of directors and insist, require? It's important in the way we conduct our lives, our businesses, and everything else. The second question, what are your deepest and most profound gifts? Many of us know what our qualifications are, our experience, but our gifts was offered to me by an indigenous leader who said, in our worldview, when the unborn child is still in the mother's womb, the Creator whispers to the unborn child, saying, I'm going to give you a tiny little piece of my genius. I will lodge it into your gut. And when you are born, I want you to go on a journey of finding and locating that little bit of genius, incubating it, working to bring it to its fullness, and then most importantly of all, share it forever. I would love us to consider making that a kind of working hypothesis. I have a gift. I have a gift. I am important. I have something to bring. These feelings sometimes that might assail me of not quite sure who I am or whatever, I have to put it aside to say I have a gift. And it's important that I find it. I can only say from personal experience that being someone for whom speaking was utterly terrifying, really, truly terrifying, and writing. And sitting with those elder indigenous people who said, Mac, you love this earth, you need to start speaking. I said, I can't, I'm terrified. They said, that's fine. I said, no, I don't think you quite understand. I think I have panic attacks. I might stand there and I could just burst into tears. And they look at me eye to eye and they say, Mac, that's fine. I said, no, I really don't think you understand. I would be utterly humiliated. I take the stage and I just start crying. And maybe I don't stop for 40 minutes. And they looked at me again and said, Mac, that's fine. Who would ever forget? You arrive on stage, the keynote speaker, and you begin crying, and 40 minutes later you stumble off the stage. Who would ever forget that? We don't give a shit. If you care enough, you'll get on that stage. But we all have stages to inhabit. And they may terrify us, but we need to take that step. And after a while, it gets a little easier. What are your deepest and most profound gifts? Undeniably, that should be at the core of your work. Because you will shine, you will be good, you will succeed, you'll be rewarded, but deep in your heart you will know that you're acting in accordance, if you like, with an invitation that life has extended to you. And the third question, what are your deepest and most profound responsibilities? Which brings us back to all those other communities about which we can read or watch on us, consider in our social media or whatever way we receive news and things, but somehow also never quite engage with. And when that diameter of our responsibilities begins to really spread, we are shifting back towards the mindset and worldview of those people who built their houses facing east or southeast 2,000 years ago in this country. And I want to finish with this. I received an invitation to go and meet a Native American Ojibwe painter, artist in Dorset. I live in Devon. And I was pleased to get the invitation. I was a little bit intrigued. I had no particular reason to meet this person, but I thought, well, why not? So I met John Potters. And the moment I met him, I felt again this, that I don't know, it's the same quality of feeling when I saw Cordy Tyndale Vivian. A different shape, a younger man, but undeniably some sense of dignity and authority. And I was very glad to have met him. And he told me this story. He said he was present when the first 2 wolves were released into Yellowstone National Park after 70 years of absence, having been wiped out, removed. He was invited by the Yellowstone Park Authority to come with his brother, Ojibwe, and with their drums sing the song of welcome home to the wolves. He told me that in their language they have no word for animal because there is no other. No word for animal. They are all relations. They're all family. And in my mind, I contrasted that with our use of the word vermin, which has been used for all kinds of animals and yet actually humans as well. No word for animal. He said they gathered there and the pickup truck arrived and there was a small group of the park rangers, and everybody was highly emotional because this is something taken a long, long time to achieve. And the pickup truck went down, the ramp went down, and the first wolf just shot across as fast as it could to the other side of the holding pen to avoid its proximity to the human beings who had terrorized their species for so long. And the 2 Ojibwe Native Americans begin to drum and they begin to sing, and they put, like, the way they sing is the way so many indigenous people sing. I mean, it tears out of your very heart and guts the way they sing, sending it out there with the passion and fury of a people who understand wildness. And the second wolf comes down the ramp and pauses, looking at them as close as I am to you, this close. And as the Native American guys sing, it tilts back its head and it sings with them, howling to the sky. Now tears are flowing with every person present. This majestic, graceful being, howling and howling to the sky, singing with them. They paused, packed up, the wolf joined the other wolf. Everybody left. And my 2 Ojibwe people stood together and looked at each other. And he said in their hearts was great happiness that the wolf had been invited back to Yellowstone, but there was also a profound sadness because they knew that they never would be. Because they too belonged. And to my mind, those wolves howling, that song, you see, is the song to us that is being sung now, is come home. Remember the original instructions that we were meant to do something rather better than this with this world. That we were asked to not only be clever, but to be wise. The fool says to King Lear in Shakespeare's play, "Thou shouldst not have grown old before thou hadst grown wise." Because there's nothing more terrifying or upsetting, really, than a person who fails that challenge. This is a most extraordinary time to be alive, but honestly, it is not a small shift that is needed in each one of us or in our businesses. It is a radical, transformative step that sets this ship on a different course. And that, I think, is a fierce, joyful, extraordinary invitation. That if there is still something left in us that loves the feeling of a big challenge, of something of which could bring us to the end of our lives with a real sense of joy, then this must be it. Well, now, I have a really special opportunity to welcome an exceptional panel of speakers to come onto the stage with me, to have a look at the topics that I've been covering, but also many others that they will bring as their gifts. So I'd like to welcome onto the stage Shalini Arora, Kenny Imafidon, I thought I got the pronunciation right. Thank you. Amy Clark and Jonathan Murphy. Thank you very much. Please come up. And while my friends come onto the stage, I want to say, if this has felt a little solemn to you, I don't apologize. Okay? If you felt a little bit emotional, I'm really glad. If you have on some level in yourselves resolved that this might be a significant day in your lives, then I'm relieved. But amongst all this, of course, there is laughter, happiness, dance and joyfulness. But maybe that's when the party starts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me. So we're going to have this conversation now, and it is a conversation, but I would love each of you to take a space now. Maybe, do we have Amy? Yes, Amy, you're Amy. Hello, Amy. Welcome. I hear you've had a rather difficult time getting here.
Points failure at Wolverhampton.
Okay, all right. I wonder if you'd like to begin with this, Amy, but it's bridging from what I was speaking about, the personal connection you have to a regenerative future, what this means to you at a personal level, and then onwards to our group.
Thank you, Matt. So I trained as a climate and a soil scientist quite a few years ago, both at undergraduate and postgraduate degree, and I think I was born an environmentalist, and my parents were and are fantastic individuals who nurtured that. So the standing joke amongst my kind of community is that if you cut Amy open, she bleeds green. I've spent about 28 years now working in the impact economy in the field of sustainability. So my connection is both intellectual and emotional. It's very much who I am. I don't have a job. I don't really have a career. I have a calling. I have a vocation, much like a doctor, I think, in many ways. So I think my connection to regeneration stems from that very early, sort of the young Amy at 4 or 5 years old, being in the garden, playing with insects, playing with wildlife, being utterly fascinated with how the natural world worked. And then as I started to get older and I had the most phenomenal geography teacher at school, Miss Black, who was a Yorkshire lady, and she taught us about the global environmental change that was happening, and he was telling us about the acid rain, if you remember the acid rain phenomenon. And I started to get a real sense, I think, when I was in my teen years, that all was not well from an environmental point of view. And if it wasn't well from an environmental point of view, it meant it wasn't well from a social point of view, because the environment crisis is the biggest human rights crisis we have. So it's been in me, it's been nurtured, it's been educated into me, this notion of regeneration, reparation, recovery, etc. And I've taken that through sort of educationally, but I've also taken that through professionally. And as I said, I'm very, very lucky to do something that I'm passionate about from a professional point of view. But bringing it back to something that's very, very personal, I love repairing old properties. I love repairing old properties, so I love renovating. Yeah, I love renovating gardens, and I love renovating houses. There is a deep sense of spiritual joy in bringing something back from the brink. So for me, it touches all walks of my life, both professionally and personally. And I'm actually very excited. I was listening to what you were saying backstage. We are in the biggest crisis of our lives, but it's the biggest gift we've ever been given.
Yes. Thank you very much. Kenny, would you like to come to that question around what regeneration means for you personally?
Yes, so Jonathan.
Oh, I was sorry, I was jumping to Kenny because I wouldn't want to
I
just...
thought you were going along the line.
No.
Oh, cool. No,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, that's fine. I was looking at it, I was like,
Be prepared for surprises.
Yeah, no, I was definitely ready for that. But in terms of, I would say personally, so, Mac, I feel like it was a brilliant speech, just to say, in terms of there's a lot to think about, and I feel like those were very profound questions, but that's just not because you said the question should be about profoundness, but they were. And I would say in terms of my own personal connection, I feel for me, particularly around when I'm thinking about this whole regenerative way of thinking, I feel like for me personally, I've come very late on that journey for reasons to do with, I think the real issue that we have is that some of these topics that we're talking about throughout this conference, they're too far away from people's reality. And to be very honest, and I think that sometimes when you're in these spaces, you forget the fact that, it's, for example, I found it, when you said like it's the most biggest human rights issue we have now, I'm around so much people where actually, to be honest, the situations they're growing up in, whether it's poverty, deprivation, high-stress environments, this is the least of their worries. And to be honest, just the fact of getting justice, whether that's just from a social justice perspective, to think about something outside of their reality and what is affecting them is actually very hard to do. And so that's why I say in terms of coming late on the journey, because it takes a lot for you to begin to see that personal connection. And then also, for me, it's really about how do we... So I spend a lot of time actually, because I run a research company and we do work with people who care about the environment and other human rights issues, actually getting them to understand this topic is not sexy, it's not attractive, it's not at the forefront of people's minds, and as much as people say they love change, how people want to bring about change and their willingness is very different in terms of compared to their desire around it. And so it's about starting from that place and beginning to build solutions, because awareness is one thing. I feel like way more people are aware now than before. And some people obviously deny this stuff even exists in the first place, but that's another conversation. However, even those who are aware, it's about how do we make this personal for them and how do we also make it practical. But then I think at the same time, there's so much burden on individuals, particularly like myself and others, to make those single actions daily. However, when we think about big business and government, that same weight and burden is not there. And I feel like actually when we do want to bring about transformation, they are big players in relation to how we change what society does and how it functions, because they very much create the framework. Obviously, government is people, but at the same time, I feel there's a lot they can do in relation to how we not just keep progress growing the same way it is, because it's too slow. On any indicator I look at or any paper I read about this stuff, it's like this stuff is going to happen by the time I have, I don't know, great grandkids. And so it's like, why can't it happen in my lifetime? And I think a lot of that's to do with what we talked about earlier, Mac, around courageous leadership, in terms of people actually having the courage to say, we're going to do this now, and this might be what happens as a result, but such is life. And I feel like until we really get to that place, we're not going to see the change that we wish to see. And that's why for me personally, when I think about this, I just try to focus on what do I love most, and in terms of what do I want to conserve or what do I want to see more of. And when I think about that, for me, my personal connection is very much around love in relation to actually, I just feel like as human beings, we don't spend enough time with other people who are nothing like us. And therefore, we have no real sense of empathy or understanding towards one another. And I feel like if anything, we're talking about regeneration, we need a big renewal, revival, and replenishing around actually human interaction. So despite the rise of social media connectivity, people are way more alone now than ever before. And so for me, if there's anything, it's how do you restore love and this whole sense of community back. And for all Western culture is very proud of and modernization, there's a lot that we can learn in terms of from other cultures and other societies about love and community. And I think actually we need to stop being so pompous and be way more humble in terms of what we can learn from Africa, Asia, and other places in terms where community is very big and they're holding on to a lot of the things that we take for granted. So I don't know, keep going on it, but yeah, but I do care, obviously.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, Kenny. Shalini.
Thank you. After a career in healthcare, I've been fortunate enough to set up our own family foundation, and we're a charity incubator, and I've been able to connect back to those things I felt passionate about when I was a teenager growing up. The environment, European Year of the Environment was 1986, I think. I ran that campaign at school, and I'm able to connect with that back again now. Our foundation looks to, through its incubator work, through supporting small charities, helping them becoming sustainable, we look to empower individuals who feel passionate and deeply love the causes that they wish to support, whether in the area of social justice, building community resilience, cohesion and integration, tackling corruption, and all of those speak to inequality. And for me, regeneration personally is about inequality as well, and inequality of access and building a stronger society. Of course, it's about the environment and climate, etc., but we also have to build a strong base on which to then tackle those issues. And to give an example of something that we're looking at the moment when it comes to inequality, we look at the whole work from home agenda, which is a great thing for so many people. But it's not a great thing if you are a manual laborer or in public transport or work in a factory or on a shop floor. You don't get to save your commuting travel fees, that expenditure, or your lunch money, or the childcare. So what that does is it drives income inequality between the people that can and the people that can't. But it also drives job satisfaction inequality. It drives that work-life balance that we all want that those people can't have. And it drives health inequity. And I think all of those things are things that, as we think about regeneration and building our society, we have to remember those people that we leave behind as well. And that's something I feel quite passionately about. It's a journey that throughout my life, I took advantage of the opportunities that were put my way, being an immigrant into this country, a refugee from Kenya with my family at the age of 7. And we were given opportunities in education. My father was given opportunities to get the job and have the career that he wanted so that I could thrive. And I think we are, unfortunately, taking those away from the more marginalized and deprived communities around us inadvertently through some of the actions that we are taking place right now.
Thank you, Shalini. Jonathan, just also so we have a sense of this, we're moving through the sort of personal, and which Jonathan will complete, and then we'll go to the sort of business, and then to the wider ecosystem that all of us inhabit in our conversation, yeah? So Jonathan, for you, a personal-based perspective, regeneration.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, when I come from a corporate background where there's very much this focus on business success and profitability, and you can get very much go down a sort of tunnel vision. You think those are the sort of the only things that you need to focus on. Now, the business I work in operates in the healthcare space, so you have this interaction with the health ecosystem, the doctors, the nurses, and the health system. And as part of that, what we came across was, perhaps it's an obvious thing that I should have had great awareness of, but health inequality is actually really stark in this country. There's a massive disparity between health outcomes in certain parts of the country to another. So I gave my results to the city a few months ago, and I made, a big part of my speech was talking about health inequality, and I think people are thinking, why is he talking about this? How does this have any relation to their building? And I gave the very simple example. So I live in the suburbs of Manchester. I live 7 miles away from Manchester city centre. So 7 miles, but 7 years in life expectancy along that road. Wow. And that is very stark. Yeah. And what I was trying to get across was that actually, as a player in that system, actually we can play a role in that. We can support the NHS in terms of some of its investment decisions, some of the design of our buildings, because that's what we focus on. But could we make those more inclusive? So an easy way might be, you should think about the location of these facilities. So if they're in the right places, then that would help bring people into those facilities and make them more likely to come in and receive treatment. Because often if the facilities aren't there, then they deny and they don't seek that opportunity. So the point I was trying to make to our investors was, this is a really important social issue, but it's also a really important business issue, because that's the market that we operate in. And if we help support the social one, we can actually also support the commercial success of our business as well. The primary one might be to make the difference, but you're also making a commercial difference too. So I guess for me, it's trying to make those connections. So where you can bring those two things together, if you can, and I passionately believe you can, I think you can make a really positive contribution on both dimensions, both the social side and on the business side. So that would be probably my personal observation.
Thank you very much. There was a time, I recall when I was a young man, it felt like the human rights people, the social justice people, and the environmental people were all a part of their energy expenditure was devoted towards being critical of the other and thinking they'd missed the point. And if there's one thing it feels like we need somehow to come back to in this idea of a regenerative future, is the weaving of all of this together as we become a little more perceptive of how all of these things interact and impact. Well, I'd love to ask you, move on to sort of business and how you see this in business, and ask you, what are the points of light, if you like, or hope or inspiration that you see happening in your businesses? Or where are there moments of a good story, if you like, where you think we're gaining traction, things are moving in the right direction? And whoever'd like to speak, please, to that, go ahead.
Chandler, you go.
Okay. I was going to
That's
talk.
good. They seem quite enthusiastic.
What I see with the businesses that we work with, and our own business as well, is that emphasis on place-based regeneration, which I find quite exciting. So when you talk about weaving those different things together, to do it locally is a real opportunity, and I see a real movement in that direction, partly driven by the levelling up agenda and those policies that we see coming out of central government, but not because they're doing it very well, but because they are changing the narrative so that local government and local businesses are seeing that, yeah, we can do this. We can build a stronger community. We can have greener spaces around our own buildings. We can provide CCTV, not just for our building, but for the road or even the town, and make the places that we live in safer. And we can provide local employment opportunities for local skilled labour. So that kind of place-based regeneration I find quite exciting.
Thank you very much.
I was literally just going to riff off what you said there, Matt. The Sustainable Development Goal frameworks is precisely what you're talking about. So these 17 goals that are intersectional, interdependent, they're a complex web of relationships. And I inhabit the banking system. So that's the sea that I swim in every day. And the business that I co-founded is a B Corporation. And we take wealth, we take private individuals' wealth, and we take institutional wealth. And we effectively leverage it to do two things: financially perform well, but also from an impact point of view, perform well as well by delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. Right. So that's all and everything that we do. So actually, I'm your dream investor. We should have a conversation afterwards. What we've seen in the system is, over the last couple of years especially, is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So in 2019, some of you may have heard of the expression environmental and social governance, ESG, which is a measure that investors look at really for sort of the operational quality of a business and how it's managing its environmental and its social and its governance-related footprint. It doesn't focus on the product and the service and whether the product and the service is ultimately creating the future that we need, where everyone and everything can thrive, but it's really focused on that kind of business operations. In 2019, there was 21 billion invested through ESG lenses. In 2020, 51 billion. In the first quarter of this year, 21 billion. Now, if you take that as a bellwether for market sentiment and what the markets are now starting to do, it's profound. It's a profound statement that the finance system is starting to wake up to the disconnection between what's happening in society and what's happening with the planet. And the beauty about the finance system is that it's coded on risk, effectively, identifying risk, and it has always self-reported to be very good at managing risk. We could argue the opposite until the cows come home. But when you're able to codify what's happening out in society and out kind of in the ecosystem in the language of risk, then the markets will always respond. Now what we have to do is get them to recognize the opportunity. And this is what our business is doing, is really looking at the coding that sits at the heart of finance and saying, it's been poorly coded, global finance. It's been poorly coded, so we now have to get back in and we've got to hack it. And the way that we do that is very much talking about what you were talking about earlier, Matt, is by bringing the values and the belief systems of individuals back into the heart of the decision-making process. The B Corporation movement is a great example of how you do that with business governance. Impact investing is a really good example of how you do that with finance. And there's just this wholesale movement happening at the moment with wealth holders reconnecting with the purpose of their wealth, the system beginning to respond to risk, and the capital starting to flow. So that gives me huge hope, bearing in mind I'm sort of in the belly of the beast and trying to give it a good dose of indigestion. There are lots of others out there now who are trying to give, a good dose of indigestion, and it's starting to work.
But how extraordinary, really, that it's only a few years ago, I remember this whole thing about sort of leaving home at home and work's work, and how we need to draw a line between the two to enable us to be professional at work and then look after home, and yet actually bringing all of us into any place we inhabit seems to be rather better. So from either yourself, Kenny or Jonathan, but also let's expand this a bit. Places, whichever appeals to you, places of light and hope, but also places of entrenched resistance and refusal, as it were, to budge.
I'm happy to start with that. That's all right. So, the first thing I would say is I completely echo the positivity, in terms of the profound shift that there has been. There is absolutely no question that there has been a wholesale shift in mindset from the professional investment community. So a key part of my job is going and speaking to investors on a regular basis, because we want to grow the business, so we want more capital, etc. So those are conversations we're having all the time. We started talking about ESG-related issues about 3 or 4 years ago, which you might say, well, gosh, you're slow to the party. But fair enough, maybe we were. But we started, and frankly, people used to say, thank you very much, that's very interesting, and then they'd move on to the next question. It has completely turned around, and we are now finding that people are asking those questions at the start. They want to spend a good proportion of your discussion about what you're doing with your business. Commercial success, of course. How's the business doing? But also, how are you running your business? How are you managing the impact that you have on society? How are you managing the impact you have on the environment? Those are absolutely fundamental issues that they are challenging. And we had a very good example this year. We launched a sustainability bond, and we raised £300 million exclusively for investing in improving and enhancing the sustainability of our buildings. There are loads of rules and restrictions on what we can do with that money, rightly. But it was a massive success. We attracted investors from all over the world, and it sold out in almost record time. And that was because there was a real appetite from the investment community towards that. So I think this is a profoundly positive moment, and we are absolutely seeing that shift. But, and we should recognise the but, it's not perfect, I'll be honest. Part of the issues are around definitions. So I'm very confident that what we've raised that money for, we will use it in accordance with the spirit as well as of the rules not really being applied correctly. There was a classic case of I think it was a Greek electricity company that was raising a sustainable bond, and it was investing in producing greenhouse gases. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? So there are glitches. The system isn't perfect, and of course there are some investors that don't believe. They don't believe. They say, I've got one. He's a great chap. I really enjoy his company. He's a very straight talking. The only thing that matters is the Milton Friedman ethos. It's my money. I want my return. If you want to spend your time on that, do it in your own time. Do it with your own money. Don't do it with mine. So there are a few people like that. Yeah. But that's definitely a minority now. So there is a shift, but we have got a few wrinkles, no question, and a few reluctant people, and the system isn't perfect. It's a long way from perfect, but it is definitely moving.
Well, I imagine that is always how it will be, in some sense or other. We just need enough over the line. Kenny?
Yeah, good. Nav, just to echo, I think in terms of, I might start negative then go positive, whichever way. But I would say I feel like there's this whole thing, when you talked about the investment and how investors are looking at things, I think maybe on a macro level, when you're talking about those types of sums, then obviously you may be able to see less resistance, everything else. But I think coming back to the point you made earlier, when you look at it from an equitable lens, actually there's a lot of people who are micro and small. When you look at investment, people don't care. So therefore it's like you can build a business now with these types of values and think about ESGs and everything else, but actually it's either, if you're too small, you won't even be able to raise capital in the first place. And so the question is for me in terms of how do we get people to back people who are actually about this. Because I know about the B Corp movement, and you can have a lot of those principles, but then you still have to sign up and you still have to pay a cost and do whatever else to be part of it. Now, so for me, it's just, I guess this more maybe even a question to discuss, as in just how do we ensure that if we do want to see businesses do the right things, that we need to actually back and invest those businesses that are doing the right things. And a lot of them, unfortunately, won't be the big players. And I feel like if anything about reshape, is that, because for example, for me, it's about where can the money be invested that can make a big difference. Because I feel like leadership is not just about who's big and doing it, but there's a lot of companies that are emerging. And what we don't want is what the typical big companies do, is buy anyone who they see as a threat but looks brilliant on paper.
Yeah.
And so it's about how do we ensure that we're able to maintain that as well. So as you grow, and all of a sudden now you get bought, and then what everyone loves about you goes missing, and no one has really found the way around doing that.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm raising more. But I do think in terms of, this is not necessarily to do with business, but as an individual, which I feel is very important. So there's one person who really inspires me, a guy called Jadav, who's an Indian man. He's from Majali Island, and he's someone who, where he grew up, he saw a lot of the place he grew up in. It basically turned into barren land. It was an oasis of where animals were and wildlife, and then he saw it become barren. And then what he decided to do back in 1979, well before I was born, in terms of just beginning to go back to this land and just plant trees. And now I think after all these years, almost 40 years later, that is now, the forest is basically twice as big as Central Park. And the reason why I love this example, just because it does really show in terms of how you can actually make a difference even as an individual, and what one person decided to do in relation to just begin to start planting trees in a place where he literally saw was an oasis. And now there's vegetation there, there's animals, you have rhinos, tigers, and everything you can name there. And it's just, for me, that's always a great example of how you can also see change in your lifetime. And I think it's very important. A lot of times people are so negative, but there's so much things to be optimistic about, and people are actually really making it happen. It's about how do we highlight this type of positive news and share. This is just what one individual is doing. Now what happens when we scale these ideas, these thoughts, and actually, and this, so when I think about investing, that's why I think in terms of how do we actually blow these things up in the right way, and not just actually how do we just get big people to be good, whereas actually there's a lot of good people already. How do we just back them?
Thank you very much indeed. So we're now moving to then your wider ecosystem that each of you occupy, suppliers, the whole chains of people that you're in relationship with. Where are you applying most attention in that sort of wider sphere, and how are you doing it, and where are you meeting success or blockage? Whoever would like to.
I'm happy to go first. That's fine. So just again talking about my own business, because obviously I'm sort of wearing two hats today. So I sort of the Northwest Business Leadership Team, which is the group of regional businesses that we're a membership group for, who are all, many doing some fantastic work in terms of trying to be leaders in responsible business. But if I think about my own individual company and what that business is doing, I mean, we're just adopting an approach of we are reviewing our entire supply chain at the moment. So we're going back through all of our suppliers and saying, this is what we stand for. So we have the sustainability commitments, which are just not for negotiation. So there are certain elements that we have to meet. We've committed to be net zero carbon by 2030. I'll be honest with you, it's a really, really big challenge for us. The building industry is just not there yet. There are some technical challenges that frankly we don't know how to get round. And we're working really hard, but we haven't got the answer yet. But we're making those commitments. So we're asking our supply chain, what can you do to help with that? And then we're also saying, in terms of, we're also looking at other areas. So we're looking at, well, how do we maximize the social impact that the business has? It's through the supply chain. So actually, if we're going to, sign a contract with a contractor to build a new centre, we're just doing one in the centre of Newcastle at the moment, in Wallsend, for example. So the contractor there has committed that they will support local apprentices, local labour. They will buy materials locally wherever possible within parameters. Clearly, you can't buy certain specialist steel and things like that, but in glass. But wherever they can, they're going to support that. And they are committing to trying to maximise the impact they have on that local economy and on that location, which is frankly quite a challenged area. So if they can make some contribution, then that's helpful, and that's indirect, and that's just by talking to our supply chain and seeing whether they can do that. So that's an example of what we're doing, and I think lots of businesses are having those types of conversations with their suppliers, and then of course there is the ripple. It's the ripple effect, so isn't it? So that's the really exciting.
So I suppose in a way it is becoming clear on what you stand for and where your values are and that, but not in a brittle manner, because we are dealing with reality. And I find that line is delicate. Like, how do I really stand for what I believe in, what I know to be the right way forward, and yet also interact with and find those places where I do need to give a little and where I need to stand. I find it sometimes quite confusing and difficult to negotiate, but I'd love to hear. Charlie, would you like to?
I was going to pick up on Jonathan's point as well about the supply chain and perhaps what you said, Mike, about where you stand. Supply chain is a big issue, especially for a multinational company, even for smaller companies, because you're dealing with global trade, and it's very difficult to hit those net zero emission targets if you can't control the supply chain all the way further down. And very different jurisdictions, different geographies have different criteria. So it's actually very challenging for a large business to meet those targets. And also we have to be aware when we think about doing things locally, at a UK level, that also can be a net zero game, because that's going to have a knock-on effect in another community somewhere else. When you're promoting your own local suppliers, unless everybody starts to do the same thing, you could end up in a sort of a cat and mouse situation. What we find is that what's sort of a really positive that's happening is that our peer groups are starting to move together. So we're seeing wage inflation, paying a real living wage, and more perks and more benefits for people because our peer group are doing that. So there is a shortage of people to work in distribution centres for HGV drivers, etc. But because wages are rising across the community, across the retail community, that's a good thing, and that's where we're focusing our efforts as well, to bring everybody along on that journey with us. So that's where, as businesses, we're focusing our efforts at the moment. But it's not easy. We have our values, but we can't tell everybody else to have the same values that we do, and bringing everyone on that journey is really hard. Speaking to what Kenny was saying about investing in those small businesses, I think that's improving. I think there are opportunities for small businesses. There are forums out there, but there aren't enough, and there's not enough celebration of what smaller businesses are doing and what community-based businesses are doing, because at the moment there are other priorities, but we've got to find a way of celebrating what those smaller businesses and people are doing.
Thank you very much. Either Kenny or Amy, anything to add? No?
I was literally just going to say, one of the things, it's a hill I will die on, is that, you know, we talk about businesses being courageous, we talk about governments being courageous. Everything starts with us. We're the problem. Not business, not government, we are the problem, because all of those institutions are the sum total of the parts, and the parts are all human. So until we start to tackle our own behaviours, our own attitudes, our own level of willingness, then we're not going to get anywhere at all. And I think when you look at the finance system, it's really interesting, Kenny, what you're saying, because the finance system has been built to transact, not to relate, but to transact. So every single relationship that I potentially have with you is a transaction. I've got something that you hopefully will want, and therefore you will buy it from me, and then you will give me money in return. It's a transaction. The relationships have been coded out of the system. And it comes back to the point I was saying earlier around people's personal values and belief systems. How often do we sit down and say, what do I believe in, and why do I believe in that? Because our values and belief systems are often set by the time we're 8 or 9 years old, and then they get reinforced by the environments that we're put in. And often they can be self-sabotaging. We can pick up values and beliefs that actually, are holding us back. And I think, when you look at the system, the values and the beliefs that are in there, unfortunately, to your point, have been coded erroneously. And, we need to recode that. But within that, there needs to sit relationships as well, how we kind of communicate and how we engage with each other. And I think on the SME point, it's really interesting, actually, because, you'll know this as well, I'm sure everybody knows this, but there are over 400 million SMEs globally. And in the global south, I think 7 out of every 10 jobs is provided by an SME, and roughly between, depending on where you are, the OECD estimates it's about 40 to 70% of GDP at the country level is, again, provided by SMEs. And yet there's no seat at the top table, there's no seat in the conversation, there's no representation. The capital, to Shalini's point, is starting to move. There is more opportunity out there. But to your point, Kenny, the whole focus at the moment has been on big business, because that's where the problems are. The solutions are often in the SMEs. And this is this sort of, I suppose, this tension between risk and opportunity. Because the market understands risk, it's focusing on big business. Let's shift the oil tankers because we have to. But what they're forgetting is the opportunity, and the opportunity is precisely where you said it is. It's with those SMEs, it's with people, it's with communities, it's with micro-entrepreneurs, whether they're in Birmingham or whether they're in Kampala. And we've got to get the system to appreciate the value that they bring. So there's a big hill ahead of us in terms of the work that needs to be done. But I genuinely think that the last couple of years, there's almost like this mass awakening that's happening out there. And I don't know if any of you have heard the term solastalgia. You will have. Yeah. And it's this notion of solace and nostalgia. And it's effectively a form of depression. Because people are feeling like they don't belong. There's no sense of home. There's no sense of homecoming. And what we used to remember, I remember being back in the garden as a 5-year-old, the insects were everywhere. I go in the garden now, and even in the organic garden, there aren't as many. You really feel it, and it's something inside that really starts to gnaw away at you, because you just think something is not right. And for those of us who work in the impact economy, we know what's right. So there's this growing sense of solastalgia where people are saying something's not right. I feel really uncomfortable with what's happening out there in the world, because what I used to remember as home and feel as home isn't there anymore. It's gone. It's been taken away from me, but I don't know who took it. And that's the really interesting thing. And I think now it's seeping into finance. So just to sort of end on a note of hope, as I said, I've been doing this for 28 years. I've been called everything under the sun. Most of my friends when I left uni, oh, you're swampy. Go chain yourself to Barclays and, make a stand. Not that I'm saying I haven't done that in my time, but anyway. What's really interesting now, without exception, in the last 2 to 3 years, the amount of senior bankers and CEOs who've turned around to me and sort of said, can I have a quiet cup of coffee? I just want to talk about what I'm doing and how I can be more contributive.
But just while we're with bankers, I was in Kenya with another group where one of the big banks had organised this event, and the CEO was asking the question, do we as a bank owe anything to the world's poor? That was the question. And I don't know, the very fact he was posing that question made me think it's likely everybody's going to say yes, which they did. And as far as one could tell, they genuinely meant it. It had opened a door to something that actually did matter to them. And it went really well. And all of them, as it were, pledged themselves, yes, they were the CEOs of all the different operations around the world. A short while later, he lost his job. And the new person came in and said, forget all that ridiculous stuff. Your job is to maximize and so on and so on. And they all said, yes. It's just like, which brings us back to leadership and where we stand. And I'm completely with you, the idea of we have to make a personal decision, knowing that in so doing, there may come a time where it might hurt. But where is self-respect without that? Ken, you have anything you'd like to pop in?
To be honest, what you just said was definitely a great example in terms of this is also back to leadership and the people you have around you, where you surround yourself with yes people, whatever the CEO says. And that is where organizational culture is also another thing that needs to be regenerated. It can't just be based on super charismatic individuals who basically say, this is direction of the company, this is the purpose. If the other people around you don't also subscribe to that personally, then by the time you're gone, then that goes as well. And that's also very dangerous in terms of, particularly in big institutions. And like you said, there's a lot of faceless organizations that exist that are massive, and they get this brilliant CEO who comes in, says all of that stuff. But even that question around, I think it's really interesting when you said that, because it made me think about another big corporate who I've done some work for. And it's very interesting, like, everyone loves this whole thing around a business case for doing good, which I really find quite absurd in the sense that actually, and I remember someone's given a presentation, they basically asked, why should we do something? And it was just the answer was, because we can.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to the person. If you can do something, then why wouldn't you? So this whole question of and I feel like that's just where I see it in terms of what is the purpose of profit and making money in the first place?
Yeah.
End of the day, the whole point is that you have an abundance, you have more than enough. If you have more than enough, you give. And I think when we're thinking about this whole regenerative and the future is about how do we create a more generous society. I think the problem is people think we're way more generous than we are. And that's already a problem. And philanthropy, particularly in the UK context, is well behind many other places in the world. And we are actually extremely way more stingy than we believe. But the problem is because people don't actually say this out loud, you'd be surprised that people think like, because when you actually look at the percentages, it always makes me laugh. I always look at like the biggest givers in philanthropy and you see all these names. When you actually look at the percentages they give, there is someone's grandma sitting over there that gives a bigger proportion of their wealth than some of these people who are super, because the number sounds big. You've heard 100 million, you think, oh my God, that is so amazing. That is 0.6%. Clap for yourself. But it's the whole, and for me, it's about how do we get people to overcome this whole sense of, because when we think about the SDGs, think about everything else, this money exists. It's not like we need to create or do anything more. It's there. It's just about how do we get people to think about actually, I have more than enough, how can I give? And I think as a business, it's this whole thing around like, if it's, yes, shareholders should profit and people should profit and so should the individuals. But even having conversations around like the living wage and like, should we pay people enough to live on? Like, and this is what I mean about not connecting with people, because I think the problem is when you are so far away from actually being around people where actually this money really goes a long way, you get so desensitized. And it's not just for people, it's not just about where you come from as well, because I know a lot of people who have come from areas like mine who have done well, and I've had to pause them in conversation and say, actually, I feel like you've lost touch with reality there, because the way you just spoke about the money and everything else, you forgot that the average person cannot do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The average person in the country. So I think there's this whole thing about sensitizing ourselves and making sure around our people so we don't make very outlandish statements in public or elsewhere where actually it's not just rooted in reality. And so I think I'm very hopeful that I'm seeing way more people be courageous, have particular conversations, particularly when we're looking in the context of like the murder of George Floyd and everything else, when we look at the conversation around race and more people having that conversation and more, even people who were very aware, even now taking a deep interest to understand other people's lived experience, that is very key. And it comes back to Shani's point before about that's how people don't get left behind. Because if you think, the problem with equality is that if you're just chasing that and not chasing equity, what happens is that, yeah, everybody gets more, but the same people still get left behind. They're just further along, but they're still as behind as they was before.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's important that we keep that in mind as we are thinking about this new future.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got about 10 minutes, in which it would be lovely if there's any questions from the audience. And I think we've got some roving mics out there. So I wonder if we could give a mic. There's a gentleman with his hand up. I think that mic is coming towards you.
Jim Corker at the Bank of New York. Thank you for a very engaging speech. I just want to ask Amy and Jonathan, institutional investments, as a trustee, ESG is very high on the agenda in any meeting I go to. And one of the things that does correlate with me is things like Tesla and the indices and stuff like that. And you're looking at investment return performance analytics as a big kind of trigger point as to whether you invest or not. But there's so much variation in measuring them at the moment, and I just wondered how you, when you look at potential investors, how you value and how you look at performance indices for your funds.
We don't run funds, so obviously we're investing third-party capital, and we have a dual lens to everything we do. It's called a twin lens approach. So there are two CIOs. There's a chief impact officer, that's me, and there's a chief investment officer, my colleague Fred. And Fred and I have the right of veto over each other. So a lot of people immediately say, well, crikey, do you ever actually agree on anything then? Because surely, if he's coming at it from an investment point of view, he's 25 years in investment, I'm 28 years in sustainability. You guys are never going to agree on anything. The fact of the matter is we agree probably about 99% of the time, because we're both looking for the same fundamental characteristics in an investment, albeit through different sort of lenses, and there's slightly different language, or slightly different tongues, similar language, different tongues. And every single investment opportunity that we look at, so if we were looking at you, just to give you a heads up, if we were looking at you, we would be looking at your investment fundamentals, but we'd also be looking at what we term your impact fundamentals as well. So that's everything from how you're running your business to what your core product and service is actually able to deliver in terms of sustainable levels of social and environmental change. They're equally weighted, and then we take the decision based on how material Jonathan's business is to solving the issues, how additional it is as well. So if you didn't exist, can somebody else pick up the load? And also how intentional it is as well. So we have a very, very, very defined, very clear approach that gives equal weighting to sort of the financials and what we term the extra financials, to make sure at all times we're choosing the best investment opportunities. Does that answer your question? Because it was brilliant.
And from my perspective, so we're an investee company, so obviously we're not running funds, but we ask the funds all the time exactly how they do that. And I think it goes back to my previous point that at the moment the data set is far from perfect. And in fact, I would go a bit stronger than that and say that it's not quite unusable, but it's very, very poor. And if you're making screening ESG decisions solely on ESG rankings, then you'll really struggle because the data set's just not there. It will get better, the analytics will get better. So what we say to our investors, we ask them about it. They do it in the old-fashioned way. So they ask us what we stand for, what we believe in, how we're running the business differently, and they do a lot of it. It's more on qualitative measures rather than quantitative, which I know is not perfect, but that's how they're sort of effectively being forced to screen on an ESG basis at the moment, because the data set, frankly, it's a guide, but it's not good enough to make investment decisions, I would say, at the moment. It will, absolutely. And just to be clear, we're committing to that, and we're providing more data, and we're helping with that as well. So, there's absolutely it's going on the right path.
Can I just add something, just very
Sure.
quickly? There is a difference between obviously ESG and impact investing, as you all know. And I think if you have legitimate impact investors now coming to you, you'll recognise the fundamental difference in the conversation that you're having, in that ESG becomes one metric alongside a whole range of other metrics where they're really trying to get that handle on who you are and what you're trying to solve for as well.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, we've got a couple of hands there. Great.
Hi, I'm Lisa Morton from Roland Dransfield. I believe strongly that businesses should be very clear on their values. And I think plenty of businesses say they are, but they don't live them, or they aren't actually clear. They might be on a wall somewhere, but they don't form part of the DNA of the business. And I also believe that if you're clear on those values as an organisation, you should remove from your ecosystem individuals in the team or businesses, clients you work with, or part of your supply chain if they don't align and show up against your values. Again, I don't believe enough businesses do that. So I'm interested in knowing your opinions if you believe that businesses actually stand up against the values, and if they did, would that make a big difference?
Thank you. It's a confronting question. What do you think? And a good one, by the way.
I was going to say, definitely check out the Better Business Act, because I think you'll like it. And this is a call to rewrite company law in the UK to fuse purpose and mission, so values fundamentally, into the core of every single business within the UK. And it's come from the B Lab movement, the B Corporation sort of family. It's not about sort of the B Corporation movement. It's anchored in the principles of the B Corp movement. But this is getting to exactly your point, that it's too easy at the moment as a business to say you believe in X, Y, and Z, and that you're doing A, B, and C, and to put a sort of an unverified report out there that frankly could be a work of fiction, a complete work of fiction. And we've seen great examples of some of what's been going on over the last couple of years with obviously the COVID crisis. So there are mechanisms at play now, there are movements at play that are getting to the heart of what it is that you're talking about. The business should ultimately be a force for good. Businesses are there to serve, and yet at the moment it feels like we're serving them rather than them serving us. And things like the BBA are part of these big system kind of changes, call to arms that are out there to say we have to fundamentally interrogate I always tend to use technology because I used to work at Microsoft, sort of technology language, but we need to rewrite the code. So where are those bits of code that we can look at? Company law is one of them.
Either of you wish to respond to that question?
And I very much agree in terms of like what you said in relation to, as companies you have particular values, then they should definitely be known, you should live to those values. At the same time, I think it's very important that leaders actually exemplify those values in the first place, and that the company is very aware, because I think the big thing about values is this, and I've seen in my own personal circumstance, now we have a team of about 12 people. Now, even when I go and make decisions and I want to do particular things, because the values are so clear, even if someone is extremely more junior and they say, actually, we cannot do that, we actually, as long as it's aligned with the values, then that's what we don't do. Because even the greatest of people with the greatest intention can actually, in whatever moment, want to make a particular decision that may not necessarily be in line with the values, that actually keeps everybody equal. And so that's why it's actually very important to have those values that people know, and then people are empowered when people know that's what you live by. And I feel like actually we can begin to see more of that if, first and foremost, people need to know their values. There are a lot of people in businesses that actually don't know what the company value is. So therefore, that's already a starting point. And a lot of times it's because businesses exist as an entity to make profit. And that's the only value that people understand so far.
Thank you. Shalini.
To answer your question about cutting those suppliers who don't hold the same values or letting go of people that don't hold the same values, I think it's a lot more complex than that. The landscape isn't mature enough yet. Those people, those suppliers will go somewhere else where they will fit in, and as a business you could then end up losing your competitive edge, which then has the knock-on impact in many different areas. So I think it's better to keep those suppliers on board and those people on board and educate them, and slowly over time convert them to your way of thinking and use your influence over them to bring them on the journey with you, rather than to cut them from your supply chain or from your team.
Thank you.
Can I just make a quick point? I think what you said is very important. I think there's something around in terms of learning to meet people where they are, and also this whole sense of, I feel this whole very hard line approach of like, if this happens, on certain things you need to have red lines, but I do think for a lot of people, when we're talking about these big topics, we do have to understand that everyone is on a journey and we need to meet them where they are, and it's about actually how can we use our positive influence to get these people further on the journey. Now, if people are not even committed to making that journey, then you should definitely explore options, but I do think actually there are a lot of people who can positively influence people, and sometimes it's better to take someone on that learning journey as opposed to just like shift them to the side. And I think sometimes some people who are very passionate about some of these topics, they can be very radical in the sense of meeting most of them where they are. So I do think that fine balance is needed.
So, my friends, we've sort of run out of time, but maybe just a brief statement from each of you as some kind of concluding or piece that you would like to leave our people with here.
Crikey.
I think we got the last piece there. You can move on.
I suppose it comes back to what is that ultimately we have a lot more power than we probably think we do. We have the power to exercise our values and our beliefs in what we eat, the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive, if we have a car, the houses that we live in. And every single time we open our wallet or we touch our iPhone or our Apple Pay or whatever poison your particular contactless is, every time we invest in the purchase of something, we are voting for what we believe in. That's a vote. That's every day. And that vote is often far more powerful than your ballot paper, because it's every single day that you're making those kinds of decisions, every single day that you are communicating to your community what you care about. And those ripples of influence, those little ripples of hope, are actually, when enough of us do them, they turn into waves, and those waves can actually then turn into, significant oceans of change out there. So just do not get paralyzed by the sense of any of the issues that you care about are too big to tackle. They're not. If you just take one action, take one action.
Thanks, Amy. Jonathan.
I guess my point would just be a positive one, really. So I would just like to highlight some of the issues that we've talked about today. There are so many businesses in the Northwest actively trying to make a difference and actively trying to support the sustainability agenda and actually trying to make a difference in the way that they run their businesses. And yes, they've got businesses to run as well, and of course they've got commercial criteria too. But there is a really positive sense of momentum in the Northwest and some really passionate businesses that are really, really making a difference. And I think it's an incredibly positive time to be part of that business community.
Thank you. It's really great to hear, Kenny.
I guess for me, to everyone, just one thing I encourage everyone to do, and just in the spirit of love and community, is to actually, as an action, is just really to find someone you can spend time with at least 2 hours, who has a whole different experience to yours, and actually spend time with them and actually get to know them. That's just the one thing I ask everyone to do. It's not hard, and if you don't have friends like that, I can help you find one. Thank you.
Shani.
I was going to say something similar to Amy, in that I think it starts with the individual. And individually, we make those actions, we build a movement, and we get the collective action. But one thing we can all do is think about our place and our place in the community and what we can do in our communities, whether it's through reaching out to a friend or whether it's being volunteering or encouraging our businesses to do something within their communities.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like a round of applause, please, for our panel. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm still feeling a little bit bad about my comment about the banker, because actually I was lost in admiration to this individual who was willing to stand there in such a public role and ask that question and make visible to everybody where he stood. And he paid a price. But the question would be then, what happened next? And to my knowledge, he's still continuing, doing everything he can within the spheres of influence he has to still move that question forward and get results. So whatever our role in society would be, and then I think it deserves a lot of appreciation and gratitude and encouragement. So it's in this hall, I have a friend. I may have more than one friend, but I have a friend here. And we've even just had a rather special conversation just before we began, which has blown me away, really, and I'm still sitting with it, which I won't reveal what that was, but it was some very encouraging, exciting news. But I'd love to invite to the stage Shami and Love. Who, Shami and Love, she's moved.
We're looking there.
Please come on. So,
Wow.
ladies and gentlemen, Shami and Love.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It is an extraordinary day.
It is. It really is.
It's a truly extraordinary day.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to be here with everybody. And I am actually just going to see if maybe the slides go up, or shall I go? Okay, I'll go over. I'm gonna walk over here. Oh, there we go. There we go. Hi. Is everyone else feeling like a lot of feelings from the last sort of couple of hours that we've had today? I don't know. I'm feeling like I've had like goosebumps. I felt myself smile. I felt myself really thinking deeply about some questions that have been asked and some topics that are different than necessarily what I would usually think about on a morning like today. So I always think it's nice to really acknowledge when we're in a moment where we're being challenged, we're feeling things, and to think about how we channel that into what we do when we all leave this room today. So I wanted to start actually, not really knowing where we were going to be at this stage in the game, with a painting, actually. Does anyone know this artist? Anyone seen this artist before? It's an artist named Jackson Pollock who wrote in the US. And the reason why I wanted to start with this painting was actually because I love art. I have a background in the arts. And when I look at this is kind of like what it feels like in the world right now. And Amy, you had like this crazy word, right? What is it? Soul nostalgia? Soul nostalgia. I'm gonna have to write that out 5 times to really get it. But that idea of like just things are feeling kind of weird. And this is kind of what like the Jackson Pollock painting looks like to me. It's kind of messy, and it's complex, and it's chaotic, and there's like lots of energy in it. And you can feel different things when you actually look at a Pollock painting. The good news is there's no wrong answer, right? The great thing about contemporary art is whatever you experienced, however makes it you feel, is right, because it's your own interpretation of it. And there's something in that about how we should just have the courage of like feeling what we're feeling, thinking what we're thinking, and then putting it out there. But I use this painting actually a lot when I'm talking to groups of people and asking them to look deeper beyond the complexity and the messiness, and asking them what they see. Does anyone feel brave enough? Anyone want to say what they see when they look at a Jackson Pollock painting? What does it look like? Confusion. Thank you. Anyone else? Anxiety. Yeah, there's a lot of emotion in it, right? Like there's like emotion. Some of the people I've talked to about this painting have said it looks like a web, or it looks like a cityscape. Jackson Pollock actually painted to the sound of jazz music. And so some people will describe Jackson Pollock painting and saying it looks like it's frozen jazz. You can imagine him splattering, and it sort of comes up like this. So there's lots of different ways to interpret it. I actually sometimes see the London Underground in it with all sorts of lines going in different directions. But the beautiful thing is, again, whatever your response is your response, because it's what you see and what you feel. Now, I'm going to grab my clicker. Thank you so much. I once asked a group of young social workers from Hong Kong what they saw when they looked at this Jackson Pollock painting. I remember one of them who came up and was just he was looking at the painting and was sort of really processing it. And what he said it looked like was, well, I'm going to do this manually. Here we go. Not sure how I can get to the next slide. I don't know if there's anyone behind here who can help me, but anyways, I will leave it and I will just sort of riff on this end. One of the things that they said when they saw this Jackson Pollock painting was actually it looked like they were sitting underneath a tree and seeing the sun shining through the branches. Does anyone else see that now when they look at the Jackson Pollock painting? Can you see? And there's something about that which I really love because it is about the peacefulness that actually nature can bring to us, actually, when we start thinking about complexity. So nature is incredibly complex. There's many different things that interconnect with one another. But actually, through that complexity, there is a sense of calmness and a sense of order. And that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to tune into a lot more. And in fact, actually, is partly why I think we are so getting to a point where we are recognizing there's wisdom in nature. There's wisdom that we can really understand and learn to help us navigate through these incredibly complex times. Oh, I have a friend here. Excellent. Thank you. Here, do you know what? I'm going to give you my magic clicker back, which I think is having a bit of a magical issue. But there we go. So there's a picture of what this lovely student from Hong Kong experienced, and that was the impression that he had looking at a Jackson Pollock painting. I'm actually going to ask you if you don't mind. Yes, next slide. Thank you. Now, some of you guys may know this word that I learned a couple of years ago, and it is absolutely in the spirit of what we can learn and how we can appreciate what's happening in nature and apply it to what we need and how we can engage in the world around us right now. And actually, when I was walking through the streets last night, I realized I learned this word here in Manchester a couple of years ago when I was in an incredible session learning about different ways to approach appreciative inquiry was the name of the thing. So this concept emerged through that process, and the word that I learned that has shaped so much of what I do now is a word, it's called heliotropy. Now, it's a fairly complex sounding word, but actually if you break it down, there's two parts to it. Helio, which is sun, and tropy, which is turn towards. And it's actually a concept in botany, so again, inspiration from nature, which refers to the tendency of plants to grow in the direction of the sun. And Mac, I was just thinking about that, how we originally built our homes facing the sun, right? And so for me, this is interesting because I think we as humans are like the sunflowers, and here's a field of them, which actually, if you know botany, if you know sunflowers, you'll know that they actually follow the sun across the sky over the course of the day. So literally as the sun crosses the horizon, the blooms follow it. And I think we as humans, we're not that different than our cousins in the flora community. I think we will grow taller and stronger and faster when we are motivated by things that are full of warmth and light and positivity. And we've heard some great examples of this already today. So I really believe that this is an important sort of motivational force that we really need to, as humans, retune into it. We need to find that light and we need to go towards it. But we can't be like helium balloons, right? Which is when you let off the string and it starts drifting off to the sky without having any anchoring in what's really happening. And actually on the panel, we heard about how important it is to be rooted in the realities of what we are facing in this world. I think I am quoting Kenny here, rooted in the reality. And what's interesting about sunflowers, right, is that sunflowers don't just follow the sun, but they are deeply rooted to the ground. There's a picture. I don't actually think those are sunflowers, but let's just go with it. So you can see the sunflowers themselves, they grow in the direction of the sun, but they stay rooted. Now, another word actually that's been used a few times today is the word radical. And the origin of the word radical is radix, which actually literally means rooted. Okay, so when we talk about being radical, let's think about what that word means, which is being sure that we are rooted to the ground. We are rooted to what's really going on. We're rooted to the science, we're rooted to our communities, we're rooted to one another. So, how does this connect to a conversation that we're having today about regeneration and regenerative futures and regenerative business? Well, I entered into this conversation realizing that what I think I need to feel more is the connection to nature as part of our own regenerative journeys. But I also really think that how I like to live my life now is being a rooted optimist. So being a sunflower, looking for that sun and growing towards it, but making sure I'm not doing things in a way that are disconnected from the ground that I am on. So a rooted optimist and a radical heliotrope, right? Radical in the definition, which is being rooted, being grounded. Now, I want to share a few stories, if I may, about what it means and what brings me hope right now, what I'm finding exciting in this world. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. Three things that are really firing me up right now, and I know this is a question that has already been explored on the panel. The first thing is that I think we really are reawakening to nature in a way that is special and different. We are realizing how critical nature is, not to control, right? Nature isn't something we control. We can see we have no control over the fires that are raging, changes in temperatures that are being experienced. We don't have control, but we need to find ways to work alongside and with and in harmony with nature. And I am so excited by the innovation and the research that's being done in this space. There's a group up at Oxford, if anyone's interested in very specific stories, called the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, and it's literally looking at where and how we can work in harmony with nature to address some of the climate crises that we are experiencing around the world. Connected to that is the second point, which is I think we are looking back. We are tuning into wisdom that is deep, that is ancient, that we have learned as humans over millennia. And Mac is such a strong, large source for me of understanding some of that wisdom where it is. And you've heard a few stories already today. But First Nations and Indigenous wisdom has so much to teach us about what we can do next to meet this moment that is truly extraordinary. In addition to looking back, I think we are also looking very much more at the young people of today. The young people of today who are stepping up. They're hitting the streets. They are working incredibly hard and bringing their energy and their creativity and their innovation and their mindsets to looking at ways to address these problems. Now, I have the huge privilege of being in a learning journey space with a group of MBA students up at Oxford University. So for the last 4 years, I've been teaching an elective on regeneration, regenerative and circular economy. Actually, and I take that back, because actually I'm trying to catch myself. I don't teach, I learn alongside these young people. And I actually we have a WhatsApp chat, 4 years worth of alumni students that have gone through this program. And when I was preparing for tonight, I actually went out to that group on this chat and I said, listen, I know where I'm seeing hope, but where are you seeing hope? Where are you finding things in the work that you're doing in your post-business school career? Where are you seeing regeneration come alive? And what's your experience? What are your ripples of hope that you're experiencing? And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to share the real diversity of thought that has come through, but also a uniting factor here, which is this is happening. So we've got some students that are working in finance who are saying, I'm hearing more and more from investors who only want to invest in regenerative businesses. And connected to that is preferential rates, because those sorts of investments are less risky right now. And I think we've already heard quite a bit about that on the panel. We've heard something about supply chains and how important it is. And this is something that's already resonated in our conversation today. And they talk about scale there as well, the size of companies that are engaging. And I absolutely hold the points about it's not just about big companies. It really can't be. There is scale within big companies, but it is about how big companies and small companies work together to drive some of these changes. We've got students that are working on creating things, and they're saying how there's so much more media support around this. And so there's a storytelling piece that's going out of sort of the communities we've traditionally heard these stories in more widely. And that's exciting. I know this is one of my students that was really is out there, and he's entrepreneuring. He wants to create an organization, and I just love this piece. He says, with my new idea, even though most of my family and friends don't really understand what I'm doing, most of the feedback is very positive and encouraging to take risk and to do the right thing. So this is just a sort of sampling of some of the business students, the students that have been studying in an MBA program, are picking up about regeneration and about what we're experiencing right now and where they're seeing hope. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, rooted in reality and being radical, right? We know we have to be grounded. It's not good just to have these hopeful stories and assume everything is awesome. We need to recognize there's some really, really, really scary science out there. Okay? Really scary science. This moment that we are in is extraordinary. And this particular slide comes from NASA, okay? Talking about how much we are changing the planetary conditions we live in. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then this one, which is interesting. So, without going into the detail of exactly what it's saying, what I pick up from this one are the lines, right? This is the trajectory we're on. This is where we need to get to. That is like a mega ninja chop, right, of change. We all need to be getting really, really loosened up and flexible to go through what this extraordinary moment calls on us to do. This is my rooting. This is what I stay committed to in thinking about the heliotropic directions we can go in. There's hope here, though, because actually what we do know is that business can be an incredibly powerful tool. And I think it is an absolute responsibility for businesses today to step into this condition and to have the courage, that's another word we're using a lot, courage, to unlock the ingenuity and the creativity and the innovation we know that are in the people who work in these organizations and businesses in order to truly reflect on this moment that we're in and the changes that really will be needed. Oh, you're so great. Thank you so much. Okay, so good news. Good news. I'm gonna end with just a couple of stories of some of the things that I think are signs of hope for what specifically is happening in business. That hopefully will be helpful for many of you as you think about what path you're going to be on, where you're going to go as sources for hope, and how you're going to stay rooted. I'm going to share a few stories of some of the B Corps. Now, you've already heard about the B Corp movement from a few people already, and there's lots more conversation we could have about them. But I just want to share a couple of stories of some of the things that I've seen in the B Corp movement of businesses that are really stepping up, specifically with this focus on regeneration. There we go. Thank you. Next slide. Here we go. We got Patagonia. How many people have heard of Patagonia? Have Patagonia jackets or Patagonia hats? All sorts of really great outdoor gear, right? Do you know that Patagonia has gotten into food? There's a whole line within Patagonia now called Patagonia Provisions, because the founder of Patagonia says we've got to deal with the food issues that we are facing on the planet. We have to build greater security. And so Patagonia is starting to sell food. And they've done it in such a way where they've created, with a range of partners, a regenerative certified model, a regenerative organic certification for food businesses. Because they think people should be able to choose the kind of food they're eating and what that regenerative process looks like. So that's an example of a food company, or that is a sports and good company that is stepping up to this challenge around regeneration. We also have Natura & Co., which some of you may have heard of that company's name before, but you may probably are more familiar with some of the brands that are part of Natura family. Brands like Body Shop, brands like Avon and Aesop. What Natura does is what it has is what they call their 3 commitments to life. One of them is to address the climate crisis and protect the Amazon. The other one is to be humankind, defend human rights and be humankind. And the third one is about embracing regeneration and circularity. And how that shows up in their organization is they are investing their money, their funds, their capital into regenerative concepts and regenerative ideas. So I think keep an eye on this company. I think we're going to see some extraordinary stuff that's going to keep on coming from it over the years ahead. And lastly is a local company here in the UK, Elvis & Cressy. Now, some of you may have seen their products before. They're a small company, but they take waste materials and they transform those materials into luxury accessories, sustainably luxurious accessories, like notebooks, like handbags. They take fire hose, for example, and they make it into these products. But Elvis & Cressy recently bought a farm. And they have made the commitment, as many businesses have, to become net zero, but they've also said what they want to become is net regenerative. And so they are working on a process right now of learning how to farm. So now they're not just co-founders of businesses, they are co-farmers of this organization which is meant to explore what it means to be net regenerative. So these are just 3 very small micro stories, but they reflect a movement of businesses that are stepping up. They are heliotropic, they are moved by what is possible and what we know is needed, right? And they are rooted to the urgency that we have to act. Next slide, please. And there's a bit more good news. I'm going to keep on doing good news continues, because I'm sure there's sort of that scary science stuff is sitting with you the way it still sits with me. So here's some more good news, which is it's not just about individual companies working anymore, because that's what we've spent some time talking about, but it actually is about how these companies are coming together and working as collective, which I think is really going to define the extraordinariness of what we're going to see in the times ahead. Next slide, please. Thank you. Amy's already talked about the Better Business Act, which is another great example of businesses coming together to drive change, system-level change, by changing the rules of the game. We heard about Milton Friedman, right? The guy who sort of set in motion this doctrine that has misguided us over the last 50 years. And what the Better Business Act is an alternative view. It's a needed upgrade in the code, as Amy said. When Milton Friedman wrote his sort of seminal piece that did sort of start the vision of what this market would look like and has continued to be shaped by for the last 50 years, this idea that the responsibility of business is to only make profit, that was back when we were using rotary phones, okay? So we don't use rotary phones anymore as our form of communication. Same way we should not be basing the laws, the rules of the game today on those things that were designed in the 70s. We need to have a different set of rules. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to check out the Better Business Act. And Chris Turner, I think, is here in the audience, who's the executive director of B-Lab UK and the campaign director of the Better Business Act. 700 businesses already, more than 700, have come together. So this is an example of collective action to address these changes we know are needed. We also have amazing campaigns happening around the world right now on the race to zero. One example is retailers coming together and figuring out how they can work as a collective to really hit these net zero targets. Why that's interesting is, I think, because it's organizations that traditionally be competing with one another that are actually saying, no, it's more important for us to figure out how we get this done together, and so we are going to find ways to work as a team and to figure out how we collectively as an industry get to zero. So there's a whole bunch of those campaigns. The retail industry is just one. We also have businesses that are working with movements of people. Koja is an example here where they actually give their employees time off to go and be involved with some of the activists, some of the movement organizations. And I think that's an interesting form of partnership that I'm excited to see more of. You know, how do organizations help their people that are working within them feel connected to the issues that are important to them? And lastly, it's about, I'm excited by the interest of collaborating across generations. Good Energy is a really interesting example. What they've done is they have recruited a board of school-aged children to advise their business because they want to tune into the creativity, they want to tune into the minds of young people to take on board those thoughts and those ideas into their strategy. They had 1,000 students, school-age students from across the UK apply for 6 roles. So I think this is something I'm encouraging people to really think hard about, is how do we collaborate with young people, knowing that they will be the ones that are going to live with the consequences of the decisions that we are taking today. And as Paul Pullman, who you're going to hear from in a minute, once said, he said, don't give young people a seat at the table. We got to give them the table. All right. My last thing I'm going to leave you with, actually I've got 2 things I'm going to leave you with. If I could have the next slide, please. One is an invitation. If you are sort of feeling like you want to do something, right? You're hearing this, you're feeling it, you're thinking about it. Here's my invitation to something you can do as doers. You think about where you want to be in the future. And one of the things we're encouraging businesses across the UK, B Corps and non-B Corps, to do is to have a board meeting imagining it's 2030, imagining it's 8 years from now, okay? Imagining that we are sitting around a table in 2030 and using it as a chance to explore as a team who's around that table in 2030, who is guiding the decisions of your business. Do you have activists around the table? Do you have climate scientists? Do you have indigenous leaders? Do you have young people? Who's the composition of your board that's going to be guiding your business in 2030? What's on the agenda? What kind of business model transformations will you be in the midst of in 2030 to move towards a regenerative future? How are you spending your capital? How are you investing in your people? Those are the sorts of agenda items that I think are going to be really interesting to explore when we think about what the world could look like in 2030. What are the rules that you're going to be following? What does accounting look like in 2030? What will we be reporting on? What are the director's duties? And where is your meeting happening? We've got some great companies already that are talking about they're going to have their boardroom meetings in forests or in schools, because the setting is going to be really important for those conversations. If you want some help on that journey of thinking about a boardroom setting or even a leadership team meeting as if it was in 2030, we've actually just launched a guide with a whole bunch of really great partners to sort of provide not answers, but sort of questions, the kinds of questions you might be wanting to think about in your process of planning it. So if you're looking for something to do and to channel how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're seeing, it's a very warm invitation to join us. We'll be sharing and learning with one another as we explore, again, what business could look like in 2030. All right, my last slide and what I'm going to leave you with is actually in advance of today, in addition to going out to my MBA students to ask them for their help to share the ripples of hope they see, I actually reread the speech that this whole event is premised on. And it is true poetry. There's a few pieces that obviously stand out, but actually the whole of the speech is quite extraordinary. And it is poetry. A friend of mine his name is Nigel Topping, and he is the high-level champion for the COP26 process. He was in an event that I had the joy of attending, and he had this great line. He said, we must be guided by the science, and we must be moved by the poetry when it comes to where we go to find the inspiration to move forward. So I want to leave you today with a little piece of poetry. And Mac, I hope you'll enjoy this, because it is in many ways inspired by some of the learnings I have picked up from you. It's a piece of wisdom, and it's called The Hopi Elders Speak. You have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back to tell them that this is the hour, and there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in the right relationships? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your own community and be good to each other, and do not look outside yourself for the leader. This could be a good time. There is a river running very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be very afraid. They will hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. Know that the river has a destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. See who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do, our growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourself. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred time and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So thank you all. I would encourage you to think about the poetry you can find in your life. Be grounded by the science and be grounded by the realities we are facing, but ultimately also find your sons and grow towards it. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's my great pleasure, I think, also now to turn over. It's not sort of handing off to someone on the stage, but rather handing off to people on video. I think we are about to hear from Paul Pullman being interviewed by Fenella Gray about his new book that is coming out just in a couple of weeks. It's called Net Positive. And I know a key part of the story he is telling in this book is about a lot of the themes we've already brought in today, but from the position of someone who has been in very senior levels of power and privilege in large corporations, reflecting on courage and what we need to do. Maybe I can turn it over to my friends over here for the video to turn on.
Welcome everybody, and first and foremost, we're sorry not to be doing this in person, but I am delighted to introduce this session as part of the Business Investment Summit. I'm Fenella Gray, Fen, Managing Director and Chair of Porter Novelli in EMEA, and Porter Novelli is a global communications and PR partner for the stakeholder era. So we really help companies use the power of communications to close the say-do gap. I'm honoured to be hosting this session with esteemed Paul Pullman, that you've just been longlisted as Best Business Book of the Year for the FT and McKinsey Awards. So many congratulations.
Thank you, Fenella. Glad to be here. Thanks.
So let's kick off. So let's start with the big question for everybody here today: the role of business. So we know that we understand that net positive is to thrive by giving back more to the world than you take. We can all make a difference. We can all profit by helping fix the world's problems, which I know is a common theme throughout your work. So could you share with us today your view on the role that business can play in building a sustainable and successful future, and particularly, I guess, when it's at its most ambitious?
Yeah, so just to be very simple, I think since a long time already, there is an increasing evidence that just a focus on shareholder primacy, which regretfully is still the prevailing model for most businesses, is a failed doctrine that destroys our natural environment, and increasingly we also see our social cohesion. The financial crisis already showed 10, 12 years ago that a system based on overconsumption, high levels of private or government debt, leaving too many people behind, is simply unsustainable. In the last 10 years, we've not addressed these issues, and here we are with COVID, and increasingly are starting to discover that the cost of not acting now is significantly higher than the cost of acting. So we're in this sweet spot where responsible business understands that this is probably one of the biggest opportunities we have, and where, frankly, businesses that are not catching on to what is happening in this world and are not responding are increasingly be put to the sideline, if I want to. Successful companies, as you rightfully say, understand, in my opinion, that profit should come from not from creating the world's problems, but actually from solving the world's problems. And our book, Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take, goes right to the heart of that. Increasingly, the private sector needs to have a license to operate, and good companies understand that they cannot succeed in societies that don't quite work, but they also understand that they cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. So increasingly, these companies see that the real differentiator to be successful is being able to compete on trust, being able to compete on responsibilities, being able to maintain deep relationships with all of your stakeholders, rooted in shared trust and values, if you want to. And that requires, for many companies, a radical change of the business model, a radical new thinking. And as you better know than I do, you cannot have these broader changes that we need, or these broader systems changes, without the organizational changes. So we're talking here about leadership transformation as much as systems transformation. Net positive companies understand that first and foremost, they have to take responsibility of their total impact in society. Many companies think that they can outsource their value chain, and by doing so also outsource their responsibility. That doesn't work anymore. Net positive companies understand that they have to optimize the return for all of its stakeholders, that the shareholder return is a result of what they do, not an objective, that they have to be involved increasingly not only in making their own business models net positive, if you want to, but also be involved in the broader systems transformations that society needs. So it's a tall order, but frankly speaking, we don't have another choice. Last year, in 2020, World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish, was July 29th, which means that after that day, we are frankly stealing from future generations. So circular alone is certainly not good enough anymore. We have to start thinking in terms of restorative, reparative, regenerative, and this is where the net positive comes in. The companies that understand that will do well. The companies that don't, I think, will be relegated increasingly to the graveyard of dinosaurs.
And we can certainly see from our own research that whilst there's a desire and an understanding to recast your business in service to all of its stakeholders, actually it's really difficult to do. And shifting that pendulum away from shareholder first to one that's catering for all of those stakeholders is really tricky. And 77% we know from the C-suite are struggling to really balance those societal needs with the needs to make a profit. So would you encourage businesses and organizations to shift away from that short-term shareholder first approach, that one that's longer term?
Yeah, there's basically two parts of that, and it's not easy to be a CEO these days. There are many challenges that are thrown at us at the same time. We see the scale of the industrial revolution and the speed of the technological revolution coming in. The lifetime of CEOs is shorter. The lifetime of a publicly traded company is shorter. In fact, it has dropped to 17 years. Lifetime of a CEO less than 4.5 years. So it's not easy to build and run a company. And It is as much a leadership challenge, if you want to, as a systems change challenge. I believe that the evidence is now overwhelming from most of the research, but also from the practical success of companies, that the companies that run their business on a longer term multi-stakeholder model with purpose at the core are the companies that are more successful, are more profitable, and have a longer life perspective than many others. So, and yet we are collectively unable to get to that point. So there are two things that we need to do. The first one is actually work on our own leadership behavior, and I call it courageous leadership, and we can talk about that a little bit more. Many of the companies play not to lose versus playing to win, make commitments that are only in scope 1 or 2, which are under their control, versus the total responsibility that they need to take. Only commit to targets that they know they already have the answer to, even if they know that it's not enough for what is really required. So it starts with individual courage. It takes courage, in my opinion, to do the harder right than the easier wrong. It takes courage to set targets that you know are needed, but you don't know quite how to achieve it. It takes courage to work in partnership, which is not everything in your control. It takes courage to be humble and human, which is needed right now. So this is where the French word cœur, which is the origins of courage, comes from. You need leaders now that work with the heart and the brain, that are humble, that show a high degree of humanity and humility, compassion. And in the COVID period and beyond, I think those leaders have done very well.
Do you believe that change has to come from the top? Is it the top that's required, the senior executives within the business that drives that change? And if so, how would you encourage each of us business leaders to find our own approach to what matters and what doesn't matter? How do we, I suppose, find our own values-led leadership style?
Yeah, so I could not agree with you more in the premise of your question that you really have to start at the top. Frankly, if you don't start at the top, it's not really worth it. The companies where the role of, let's say, diversity is relegated down to the HR department are usually not successful. Companies where CEOs read from a speak sheet prepared by the PR department to give their latest greenwashing statement are not going to be successful. If you, as a CEO, not personally internalize the challenges that are out there, if you cannot verbalize what your purpose is in life and what you want to do to make this a better world and a positive contribution, how you relate that to the company, and then more importantly, how you walk the talk. There are too many that talk the talk but not walk the talk. And frankly, people around you will pick up on that very quickly. Right now, the main driver for employment, which is very difficult for companies to get the right talent, is really purpose. People want to work for companies that bring their values to life, where they find the sweet spot between what the world needs, what they're good at, and what they're passionate about. And they look at the company's leadership to see how they behave. A fish starts rotting from the head, and that's not different in a company either. The most difficult part for leaders is the difference between their perception about themselves and the reality of how the organization sees them. Over 75% of leaders think that they're very purpose-driven in the broader sense in service in the US and in Europe. But for employees, that's only 17%. They don't see them acting in that way. So Stephen Covey said it very well in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful Leaders. He talks about you cannot talk yourself out of things you have behaved yourself into. So this behavior part I cannot stress enough, and that is why you need to have that strong ownership from the top. Otherwise, all these efforts are futile.
Paul, if there's one thing you'd like to leave this audience with, and I think we've sort of touched on this before, but if you were to kind of, your rallying cry to us all, how would you like us to leave this session?
Well, we've talked about a lot, and I've given some ideas what businesses should be doing, but I think the rallying cry is a very simple one. We all know what is going on in this world. I think we don't need to explain anymore the issues of climate change or inequality or stand still by navel gazing. We need people that take that responsibility, take action, and convert their business models. And my request is a very simple one. I was born in the Netherlands in 1956. I had a piece of bar soap at home, so I didn't die before the age of 5. I got food, so I didn't end up stunted. I had enough nutrition. The government paid for my education. My father worked in a factory. We had 6 children at home. I wouldn't be here talking to you if the Dutch government has not paid for my education. But frankly, the more I live in this wonderful world, the more I realize that I won the lottery ticket of life. What did I do for it? Nothing. I happened to be born in the Netherlands. If you won the lottery ticket of life, which I think is the case for everybody that is listening in, you're financially to a certain degree independent, you can work where you want, you don't have to deal with all these issues that the rest of the world has to deal with, but you only belong to 5% of the world's population. If you belong to 5% of the world's population, it is your obligation, it is your duty to put yourself to the service of the other 95%. There is a reason why you're in a position of power or a position of influence. Some might call it board authority or formal authority. But increasingly, the companies and the leaders that are going to succeed are the ones that understand that ultimately we drive this world with the moral authority. And that can only come if we understand that we are all better off if we put the interest of others ahead of ourselves, knowing that by doing so, we will also benefit. And that is the situation that we're in right now. That requires that urgent courage and that requires that urgent action that I'm sure anybody listening is willing to take on. The Dalai Lama said it well when the Dalai Lama said that if you seek enlightenment just for yourself to enhance your own causes, you miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment to help others achieve their causes of their objectives, you are with purpose. So my simple message to everybody here is live a life with purpose.
Live a life with purpose, and use our platforms, use our communications channels, use our authority and leadership to create that change. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much for participating in this summit. And I know for many people listening in today, the journey actually starts this afternoon. There are a series of workshops going on that follow this that you're participating in. So for now, I believe it's back to the stage over at home in Manchester. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanilla. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Wow. I, for one, have absolutely loved this morning. I'd just like to take the opportunity for a round of applause for everybody involved, for Mac, the panel, for Charmaine. I mean, I just found it thoroughly engaging and interesting. So thank you very much. And also to consider something that Paul had said, when you go to your sessions this afternoon, emphasising on the opportunity for you to focus on what courageous company means to you as individuals. Okay, so 2 points before we break for lunch. Firstly, there has been a little change to the workshop schedule. So you should have been informed of that before you all arrived, when you arrived this morning. But any questions at all, please go out to the front desk, and Catherine and the Ripples of Hope team are ready and waiting to help you with any inquiries. And secondly, to support and enable the opportunity for some social distancing if required during lunch and networking time, we've staggered the lunch into 2 stages. So just please don't feel that you need to have to rush or be all gathered together if that makes you feel uncomfortable. The food will keep coming, I assure you. And on that note, head out to lunch. It's outside of the cafe where you had your breakfast this morning, and we'll see you at 1:30 for your workshops. Thank you very much.